Hi, and welcome back to the Void Centering Podcast. I am Adam, here to bring you today chapter 1152 of One Piece entitled A Horrible Day. We can start talking about the cover page. We see Yamato give Kawamatsu a hat. Congratulations, Kawamatsu, you've received your new Casa hat as Daimyo of Hakumai. Ed, would you like to start with the chapter?
Yeah, so it starts off with Luffy and everyone that's still in the underworld area of Elbaf, and some of Hajrudin's crew are preparing like this pulley system to get people up to the surface level. And Chopper and Gerd are staying back to help heal Scopper.
Scopper informs Luffy that maybe he should reevaluate the ways that he's using Conqueror's Haki. He informs Luffy that the God's Knights are not immortal, they can be hurt. Luffy, in typical Luffy fashion, says he's going to save everybody and rushes off without further notice.
Yeah, so Loki hears what Scopper is saying to Luffy, and he's like, you know what? I think I understand what you mean about the Conqueror's Haki. So then Loki's like, hey, Hajrudin, can you please let me up on the surface? You guys will need me, and I'm the only one with the experience against the God's Knights, so I know I can beat them. But Hajrudin says that he'll never agree to take him.
Scopper then mentions to Zoro that he believes that Zoro also has Conqueror's Haki. In the meantime, Sanji thinks that Scopper is talking to him, and in typical Oda fashion, I think it's confirmed. We see Zoro being favored over Sanji. Scopper says, no. You don't have Conqueror's Haki. I'm talking to the guy behind you with the moss head. And says that Zoro is a natural with Conqueror's Haki. And Zoro acts all amazed, like, hey, are you saying I know Conqueror's Haki? I can use Conqueror's Haki? And Scopper says he senses it just oozing off of Zoro, but he's got to train with it. So I think we're going to see while Luffy goes up ahead, maybe Scopper is going to give him a quick pointer on using Conqueror's Haki.
Yeah, Luffy is also surprised that Zoro doesn't realize how much Conqueror's Haki he has, because Luffy just feels it coming off of him as well. So next we have Loki and Hajrudin continue to argue, but it ends with Hajrudin being unable to forgive Loki for the murder of their father. So he's still upset about what he did 14 years ago, I believe. So Luffy sees this argument and he's like, you know what, Loki, you should join our crew. And this will make it so that Hajrudin will have to agree to free you, because then, since you're both under my crew, I have ultimate control over you guys. And Loki's like, I would never listen to anything you have to say. I'm not joining your crew. And Hajrudin's like, yeah, no matter what, even if he was in the crew, I would never agree to freeing Loki. He just did unthinkable things. He killed so many people. So, yeah. Sanji and Zoro also protest about this, saying that they don't have room on the ship. Sanji can't prepare enough food. So yeah, this is seems like it's not going to happen. So next, Scopper actually asks them to free Loki as well. And Hajrudin is just completely in disbelief. He's like, Loki killed 113 soldiers. He wounded Jorul with the sword and even killed his own father. So Scopper responds to this, saying that the day that this happened, him and Shanks felt an extreme and abnormal Haki coming from the castle, and they didn't exactly see what happened, so they don't necessarily know that Loki actually did these things. And he's like, you know what, Loki, you need to tell Hajrudin what happened, because he still is your brother after all. You might have different mothers, but you're still brothers. And Hajrudin also demands the truth from Loki. And Loki is like, you know what? It's really cruel for you to ask me to relive the events and details of that horrible day. So now we get a flashback to 14 years ago.
Yes, in typical Oda fashion, we get a flashback. We see Loki walking through the castle with Jarbool coming back from adventures in undisclosed locations. They're walking about. Loki is excited he says, "Oh, Jarul, you're looking good. I'm happy to be back." He goes to walk in to see his father, but they're having a conversation about the direction of Elbaf, how they're becoming more of a land of peace, and discussing kind of the transformation in recent times. Loki, in typical fashion, decides he's going to kick the door down to witness soldiers surrounding his father, all stabbing him in unison.
Well, what also happens is that there's a guard in front of the throne room who's kind of like trying to stall them and be like, "Hey, like I gotta check in with the king to make sure you're welcome to come in." And Loki's like, "No, I'm not having that." And that's when he kicks the door down because him and Jarul actually hear a commotion in the throne room. So they kind of sense an urgency and they're like, "No, we're not going to wait for you to check. We're going to just go in right now."
So they walk into the throne room to see Harul getting stabbed and mortally wounded. They're shocked, and in the meantime, we see Shanks and Scopper sitting down, reminiscing about old times in a hot spring overlooking the castle. And Shanks is like, "Oh, Scopper is like, "Oh, Shanks, I haven't seen you in a long time. What's it been, 3 or 4 years since Roger died?" Shanks exclaims that it has now been 10 years since Roger died. So there's a slight time distortion there. Also on the panel, we can actually see when Shanks is lying down in the bath, we can actually see a tattoo on the back of Shanks's arm. It looks like a circle with a cross in it, which is very interesting. I just noticed that. And then Shanks says life has really taken a lot of tops and a lot of turns. I thought I would be on a crew with Buggy right now, just enjoying our time. Never did I think that I would be here in Elbaf. I guess there's so much more to learn of the world. Scopper goes on to call Shanks a child of fate, and he says he shouldn't be worrying about the details. And then they start reminiscing about Little Garden where they met Dory and Broggy. And then we see Ripley jump in, and she is asking if the temperature of the water is fine. And then we realize that they're actually in a small bath in a giant house. Ripley's there with the baby, and they're on the windowsill in their own little human-sized bath. Ripley informs them she made them some dessert. It was a lingonberry tart, and Ripley is asking if Shanks has any stories about Scopper from back in the day, and we see a humorous interaction with them where Shanks is just trying to eat some of his lingonberry tart, and Scopper is chastising him, making sure he doesn't tell all those embarrassing stories from back in the day.
Yeah, so next we see Scopper and Shanks just discussing with each other only. So Ripley's gone. Just about King Harald and how he's worshipped like a god in Elbaf. So Shanks says that he did meet Harald in the Holy Land and he wanted to discuss with something with him that he couldn't do at the Holy Land. So he wanted to talk to him in Elbaf before it's too late, which we don't really know what that means. It's pretty ominous. And then we cut to the narrator saying that King Harald was killed on this day. And we see an image of Jarul getting that sword stabbed through his head. We see a treasure chest, a closed treasure chest containing the forbidden devil fruit of Elbaf. And then the narrator questioned what caused people to praise and worship the most beloved king in Elbaf's history. And the narrator now takes us to a further flashback to 109 years ago from the present day. So whatever 14 minus 109 is from that flashback. But yeah, so during this time, we see they basically, if anybody was asked the question, who's the most frightening thing on the sea, the unanimous answer would be the giant pirate crew, which was headed by King Harald. And part of that reputation was King Harald, who was 45 years old at the time, or in human years, it equates to 15 years, was a low-life scumbag. And we see him like say, "Oops, I slipped," and stomping on his own crewmate onto a castle containing a beautiful princess. And he has no remorse. He's laughing and he's saying, "Who's your god now?" And that is how this week's chapter ends.
Yeah, so definite scumbag energy coming off of Harold. I also think it's very interesting that he mentioned, "Who's your god now?" We might have to revisit that after the chapter ends. But the first thing I think that we should talk about and discuss is Conqueror's Haki. It was mentioned early in the chapter. I think we should really touch on the point that uh, we found out that Zoro's Ashura is actually Conqueror's Haki. So Zoro has had Conqueror's Haki for quite a while. What do you think the possibilities are going to be once Zoro actually learns how to quote unquote tame his Conqueror's Haki for a little bit? Do you think he's going to get a training montage with Scopper showing him the ropes, some pointers, kind of being his Rayleigh figure, if you will?
Yeah, I think that I'm not sure if Scopper is going to be the one that helps train him necessarily, but I do think that like once he does master it, he'll be able to create his own black blade. I don't know if any of his blades that he currently has aren't black yet. I don't remember, but if any of them aren't, like I believe that he'll make that turn into a permanent black blade by imbuing his own hockey into it. So I think that he's well on his way to, now that he's aware that he has conquerors, I think that he's going to be training that for sure and incorporating it in his combat. And yeah, like also Scopper was just saying that like a key part of hockey in general is knowing you have it and knowing when to use it. So now that he knows that he has it, he's going to figure out when to use it and mess with it. And I think that this is just going to be a huge power increase for Zoro moving forward.
Well, we always see him training with it, but I'm kind of worried about the here and now, right now, because he's got to utilize it in a way where he can mortally wound some of the God's Knights. I think that was one of the main points behind Scopper having that one-on-one discussion with Luffy, saying, "Hey, figure out a way to utilize Conqueror's Haki a little interesting." So I think Zoro's going to have a quick power up too. I don't know if Luffy's going to have the coddling he kind of had when he learned Armorer's Haki 2.0 and he learned how to channel his armament into his fist. But do we think that the black blaze are caused because of armament, or do we think they're caused because of pouring your Conqueror's Haki in?
Right now, I'm leaning towards it being pouring your conqueror's hockey into it, just because like a sword is not really a defensive weapon or item, really. So you can use it in defense, but it's usually associated with offense and being offensive and attacking. And I would say that armament hockey is, again, more so defensive in nature. Like you can use it offensively, and we've seen it used offensively, but the root purpose of it is a defensive nature. So to me, it makes more sense for it to be conquerors than armament, but like I could see it being armament. It makes sense that way as well.
I always thought it was kind of a side effect of pouring immense amount of Haki into an item. Now, I always was of the mind that hockey was like direct willpower and the different colors were how you apply it, right? But I think we should talk about that a little bit later. But perhaps Zoro utilizing his Conqueror's Haki more and channeling it into his swords will turn them into black blades. And I think that's going to be really good for the series. If anything, I'm of the mindset that once you imbue something with Haki so much, it starts to inherit traits about the imbuer or the user, if you will. So it's going to be really interesting to see Kitetsu, if you will, to have Zoro's kind of like wild and like animalistic kind of energy thrown into it. I think that's going to be very.
Yeah, that sounds really cool. Yeah.
So I guess we can move on and discuss different ways to utilize Conqueror's Haki. Now, when we've seen some interesting ways to utilize Conqueror's Haki. It was introduced obviously as a way to knock out a lot of people or to influence an animal and stop an elephant from charging. Now, if you remember when Shanks and Whitebeard first met on Whitebeard's ship, we actually saw Shanks step onto the Moby Dick and affect items and damage them with just his quote unquote aura alone of Conqueror's Haki. So that was the first time we actually saw Conqueror's Haki being able to physically damage something.
Yeah, we also see people, it's very common that people just get knocked out and have like foam coming out of their mouth. So they just get completely knocked out. Only the people with the strongest wills, like even if they don't have like Conqueror's Haki necessarily, if they have a strong willpower, those are like the only ones that can really stand up to that immense aura of Conqueror's Haki, like coming from someone like Shanks.
We see that people are able to stand up to it too, but it begs the question, right? If if the rudimentary Conqueror's Haki that we've seen is also just influencing people enough to knock them out, we're getting to the point in the story where we're seeing 2.0s and advanced versions of all these Hakis. So I think it's really not a long jump to see Haki actually being used for mind control. And
Yeah, let's first discuss what the 2.0s that we've already witnessed are. So like for instance, observation Haki. At first, like observation Haki 1.0 we'll say is kind of like being able to see in a greater distance and then observe or just being more alert and aware of things. And then observation Haki 2.0, we'll call it, is kind of being able to see the future like Katakuri can. So that's what we've seen it already. Were there other instances of 2.0 in either armament or conquerors that we've noticed?
I just want to say, I believe Conqueror's 1.0 also allows you to sense the willpower of somebody to a certain degree. And
I can see that. Yeah.
I, Armor's 2.0 is pouring your armament Haki into another object, right? As well.
When did we see them do that? I don't remember.
I think we saw them do that on Wano with the swords. Remember, Zoro was pouring his.
Oh, that was armament. Okay.
So
Yeah, that makes
yeah, they had
sense.
that Haki struggle, but I don't know if it's sword specific.
It could be anything, any item, I would say. I would imagine if you can do it in a sword, you could probably do it in something else. And it makes sense for a swordsman like Zoro to have that like close bond with an object like his sword. Like that's like an extension of himself. So it makes sense that it would be like an easier vessel for him to pour it into because of that tight bond.
Conquer, or excuse me, I think Haki as a whole is just willpower, right? So depending on the power level of your willpower or the strength of your Haki, depends on like the reserve that you have to utilize it. Now I think people are genetically like better at using Haki than others, and that's why Conquerors is such a thing. But I think people are, at least in the story, they're born with a predisposition to Haki, and there are people that are just better and they have the genetics to have more Haki as well as training with it. Now, I think armament and observation are different ways to utilize this willpower, whether it's arming yourself or whether it's centering yourself to be able to observe, future events or your surroundings. And if we conceptualize armament as kind of a Haki of the body and observation as a Haki of the mind, I think it's very interesting to think of Conquerors as a mixture of both of those because
Yeah, absolutely.
it allows you to physically affect and overcome living organisms, which is the body.
Yeah. And if we think about it, anybody that's displayed Conqueror's Haki, we kind of already assume that they have both armament and observation. So I feel like it's kind of like a prerequisite to have both observation and armament if you want to have Conqueror's Haki. But yeah, let's go back. Let's circle back to the Conquerors 2.0. So what were you thinking that 2.0 was going to be for Conquerors?
I think Conquerors 2.0, instead of being able to overpower somebody with your will in terms of knocking them out, I think you could influence people with your willpower to either incept an idea into their head, or if the differential in the Haki is so great, you can physically control them. Now, we've seen these lower foot soldiers, there's it just so happens there's a massive amount of this weird hockey that we don't understand, but we can totally sense. And it just so happens to be at the time when King Harold is getting assassinated.
Well, also the narrator of this chapter has kind of been hinting at this question of what caused people to praise Harold so much. And then we do a flashback, but could it also be that maybe King Harold has Conqueror's Haki himself and he's kind of making everyone around him worship him?
That's an interesting point. That really is. I don't think Harold is such a bad guy. We can touch on his backstory a little bit later, but I think ultimately he became a benevolent king. But we do see, I think that the horns, especially, act as almost conductors for channeling Haki directly into the brain. And we notice that the horns are black, right? Haki turns things black. If you look at the panel of all the all the guards stabbing Harold, they all are wearing helmets with horns on them. The horns are all black. The horns are also reminiscent to Kaido's crew as well. Do you think it's just a coincidence? I don't. If you think about it too, the way the giants work, the horns are they're part of their skull. I mean, the brain is the only thing that the skull is the only thing that separates the brain from the outside world. If you were to try to channel, your willpower, your Haki into something, it would act as a, proverbial lightning rod, if you will. So, last chapter, I also speculated that the horns themselves were being used to channel Haki into the brain. And I do think that it's no surprise that Harold was probably being mind controlled, at least for some extent.
Yeah, or at least like influence, like you were saying, like just having kind of like that intrusive thought to influence him to kind of be this petulant, bratty team that is hell bent on destroying things. And I was thinking that, oh, well, we have a Herald section later, so we can actually circle back to that next. Yeah, so I guess our next topic of discussion is going to be Loki. So the first thing was that he was invited to join the crew. So immediately, the number 2 and number 3 powers of Straw Hat, so Sanji and Zoro both did not like the idea. Zoro was like, he's too big. He's not going to fit on the ship. Like, where would we even put him? And Sanji's like, we don't have enough food. Like, he eats more than you, and you eat a lot. So immediately, he's just getting vetoes from his crewmates. He's getting vetoes from Hajrudin, and he's getting vetoes from Loki himself. So, like, at this point, because everyone's saying no, and just for logistical purposes, I don't think it's going to happen. What do you think?
I don't really think it's going to happen. We also have to understand, weight displacement is a thing. So I think if you have a giant on the crew that's the size of Loki, who has ancient giant blood running through his veins, I think it's going to make the ship sit a little bit deeper in the water, if you catch my drift.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Frankie would have his work cut out for him, but I don't know. I think it would be really interesting to see Loki on the Straw Hat crew, but at the same point in time, I don't foresee that happening, considering his brother, who is the nicer and more well-adjusted of the bunch, is already part of the Grand Fleet. So I can't see that kind of conflict of interest. I do see Loki joining the Straw Hat Grand Fleet. At the end of this, I do see him and Haruden holding hands, rebuilding the kingdom together as, brothers in war, like Dory and Broggy before them, right?
I agree. So let's move on to possible powers and also just his powers. So we already know that Loki has that ancient giant's blood. He is massive, even for a giant standard. Like, he's 2 or 3 times taller than a normal giant. So he's just got base level power that is stronger than a normal giant. So base level power and sturdiness and all of that. He probably has Conqueror's Haki. And I only say that because in this chapter, when Scopper was kind of talking to Luffy about Conqueror's Haki, Loki was on the same page. He understood everything that was going on. So he was like, I think I understand what you're saying about that and how to defeat the God's Knights now. So I believe that he probably has Conqueror's Haki. What do you think?
I would say it's safe to say he's probably one of the strongest characters we've seen thus far. If he doesn't have Conqueror's Haki, I think would be a huge nerf to him. Plus, he's a descendant of a king, so I think it's pretty much confirmed.
Do you think that he would stand up to Kaido in a fight one on one?
I mean, we haven't seen his powers yet. We've seen him chained to a tree. The only thing we see was really him, you know, light the world tree on fire. So I have no idea right now, but
I think, like already, I think that he is Kaido level. Again, we haven't seen any feats of his other than swinging his hammer once and summoning a lightning bolt. And it was it was massive. So it was a lot of power, and that was just one swing. So I think that just from that feat alone, I'm thinking he's probably Kaido level in power. But yeah, so switching to his hammer, he's got a hammer. It's called Ragnir. And anytime he swings it, he can summon lightning bolts. So that's pretty strong. Like he swung it once and lit the Atom Tree on fire and caused a commotion up in the service level. So yeah, he's got that. And yeah, the hammer is called Ragnir, which I think is a combination of Ragnarok, which is like the apocalypse or end of days, and Mjolnir. And so Mjolnir is famously like a small hammer, whereas Ragnir is it's like the size of Loki, basically. So it's maybe like a little shorter than Loki, but it's massive. It's got a long arm and it's got the hammer at the end. So yeah. And then next you want to talk about his potential devil fruit.
I haven't landed on any specific one, but we do know in the series that Logia fruits and ancient or legendary zones are now pretty much all held by the strongest characters in the series. So I would say it's got to be some kind of mythical or ancient Logia. I don't know if it's necessarily like another Hito Hito no Mi, but we will see Loki use it, hopefully, and we will see him transform. I know he's obviously going to get released and we're going to see him fight. Judging by the mural as well, we know that Loki is going to be fighting, hopefully, on the side of the Straw Hats in the final battle. So it's really going to be interesting to see.
So with Loki, I think that in Norse mythology, he's kind of like the trickster god and he can transform a lot. So I think that he could potentially have a fruit that makes him be able to transform into different various animals, or it might just be specific animals. So Loki was mother of Jormungandr, which is like the giant serpent that commonly I believe it also likes to eat its own tail sometimes. Maybe that's something else. But that's like the sign of Ragnarok is Jormungandr is attacking. The other potential mythical Zoan he could be is Fenris wolf. So it's just like a giant wolf. So those are kind of like the two candidates if it's a mythical Zoan fruit.
Interesting. Well, I would love to see a giant wolf or a giant panoply of animals that he could become. I couldn't imagine what kind of devil fruit he would have right now that would directly be allied to Elbaf. What?
Well, also we know that this was like a heavily guarded fruit. It was kind of like the main treasure of Elbaf. So this is something that might be like mythical, or sorry, it might be like ancient weapon level of power. So like probably not, Nika Nika, but something right below that in terms of devil fruit.
I think it would have to be honest with you. Now, do you think that
It has to be. Yeah, it's going to be something epic. Like there's no ifs, ands, or buts. We're just waiting to see what it actually is going to be.
here's my thought. So I think that this has been a fruit that's been guarded since the ancient wars. And I think this fruit was guarded in such a way that it's only to be eaten or used at the end of days. to bring about Ragnarok. So I think that we are seeing a huge transition in the story right now, and these events were already set in motion. So I think basically what happened is they mind controlled the people to kill Harold and set Loki up. They made Loki eat the fruit under the assumption that they would be able to control Loki and have him become like a subordinate to them. And in doing so, they turned Elbaf against him. And we see now they're coming to collect, right? We see now the God's Knights are coming to collect on.
True. Wait, I have another theory on what his double fruit could potentially be, and that is the god Surtur. So in Norse mythology, Surtur was a powerful fire giant, and he was the harbinger of Ragnarok and the end of the world. So this would be pretty. This would be also be similar to Loki, because Loki has also kind of been associated with fire a little bit already by summoning that lightning bolt and causing fire. And Surtur is like a fire titan, fire giant. So, yeah.
Interesting. Fire also happens to be like the bane of the mother tree as well, right?
Exactly.
But you also have the implication with the mother flame as well. So, if this is something that's been guarded since ancient times, a fire giant seems like it would be on par with something that would be ancient weapon status, especially if there's some kind of implication with the mother tree. Perhaps this has the type of energy that would be able to activate like some of the ancient machinery that we've seen, because we've only seen ancient weapons currently be activated by the mother flame or something similar, but there had to have been like an ancient equivalent, because we know Vegapunk created the mother flame, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there was mother flame back in the day during the Void Century that Vegapunk saw the schematics to and made a less optimized version, so like a bit weaker version of it, but he could have probably created the full version as well. I'm not sure, but that's kind of like where my head is at with the history of the mother flame and Vegapunks.
Interesting. I do like the implication with Ragnarok as well, because this is like the final war. This is going to be the end of days. This is going to be end of the third act before, everything comes together. It's a fight for the world.
Oh yeah, I think that we're definitely doing Ragnarok in One Piece for sure. Like it's happening. Moving on then, let's go on to Harald, King Harald. So we are getting a flashback to his early life. So he's 45, which is equivalent to 15 years old. So we first off, we notice that Ian's age is 3 times that of a normal human, it seems like. So 45 divided by 3 is 15. So that's just kind of interesting. But yeah, like right now, I'm kind of thinking that maybe he's being controlled by the world government. Again, we talked about his black horns and potentially being swayed by Emu. So you wanna talk a little bit about that, Adam?
Sure. I think that the world government tried to control Harold. I think they've been controlling him for a while. I think the implication behind that was he's an ancient giant, perhaps back in the day. I think the ancient giants were perhaps a faction of giants that sold out to the world government, and so they were cursed. But that makes them more susceptible to being mind controlled by the world government, because eventually they were just pets, right? And I think they installed ancient giants kind of as the leaders of Elbaf, so that Elbaf would be controllable, and so the world government could ensure themselves that they would win the war at the end of the day. But they never expected that Harold would break his horns off and would go rogue. So I think they did the next best thing. They killed Harold, and then they installed Loki to do the exact same thing. And they made Loki eat the fruit. Now, do you think they made Loki eat the fruit, or do you think he ate it kind of as like an act of rebellion, and that act of rebellion is really what set everything in motion?
I'm not sure, honestly. I'm leaning towards it was his own free will to eat the fruit. We also know that devil fruits kind of have a mind of their own. So it could have been the devil fruit saw Loki as a good host for it, and the devil fruit itself drew Loki to eating the fruit.
Ooh, I like that. I like that. Maybe the devil fruit, if it does carry the will of somebody who is from the ancient kingdom and was aware of kind of what was going on, maybe it would beckon to Loki kind of, you know, you'll fail unless you eat me, unless we join forces, that kind of thing. Interesting. I like the way you think.
Ah, thanks. All right. So we also know that Harold, like during the Loki flashback, so 14 years ago, right before Loki sees his father's murder, he, Harold did visit Reverie, and Shanks was there. Why was Shanks there? So actually, he brought this up while reading the chapter that Shanks had this tattoo on him that was like a cross with like a circle. Well, guess where we've seen that symbol before? We've seen it on the armband of some God's Knights. So this is my theory, Adam. I think that Shanks was pretending to be his twin brother Shamrock, and he was there undercover in Marijois. And the reason he couldn't talk to Harold openly was because Harold thought that he was Shamrock, not himself. What do you think about that?
I think that's quite a possibility. That's very interesting. I think it leads more into the point because we discussed as well. I think the timeline lines up in such a way that Reverie just happened. And I think Harold was just getting back from Reverie when he was assassinated. And I kind of think Shanks maybe caused a commotion or was eavesdropping there and then followed Harold back to discuss private matters. I think the God's Knights or the rest of the world government picked up on it and they followed them back and ensured that Elbaf would remain loyal to the world government.
But why would Shanks have the God's Knights tattooed on his arm in the same side that symbol is on all of their uniforms and outfits?
It's true. Was that also the arm that Shanks lost? So that would be like plausible, deniability for us never to see that again in the future of the story as well.
That was indeed the arm he lost.
I think we're definitely picking up on something here too.
Which begs us to question if he willingly lost, like honestly, it just kind of proves that he willingly lost that arm when he was saving Luffy. Like he was betting on the future generation, yes, but also he kind of got rid of it on purpose a little too.
Now here's the question, or here's the point I want to make as well. Shanks was found when he was a baby. Do you think they tattooed the symbol on a baby, or do you think that's some kind of birthmark that all the God's Knights have through some divine demon magic or something?
I don't think that they would tattoo a baby that young. I think that that would probably be like a rite of passage to God's knighthood. So once they get accepted, maybe teenage years as part of initiation, they'll get the tattoo. That's how I see it, but it's just speculation at this point because we still don't really know that much about the God's Knights even.
Interesting. I really like your theory. I'm so happy we picked up on that tattoo.
Yeah, me too. So yeah, why would the Giants go to the Reverie though? So why was King Harald even there? I do know that the world government has been trying to get giant children for a long time. So maybe before that, they were just trying to get giants on their side as a whole, as a nation. And so maybe, the giants were kind of given the opportunity to become celestial dragons for certain giants. That's kind of where my head is at with that. So what kind of incentive would the giants have to go join the Reverie? Well, we already know that it's filled with only kings and queens, rulers of the great nations. And most of those rulers are celestial dragons. So maybe the giants are trying to get into that pantheon of rulers. It's possible. We do know that by the time he died, he didn't have horns. And we also know that there was an image of him, like a portrait painted of him. So, and he didn't have the horns. So we don't necessarily know that that Harold had the horns during the Reverie still. My guess is that looking at the image of Harold, it looks like it kind of scarred over and healed. So there was probably a good amount of time. I'm thinking that it was probably years and years, if not decades. So my thought is that he probably tore them off a while before that. But again, it could have been more recent, and I'm wrong.
The painting was made post-mortem. It was obviously a way to memorialize him, as any painting of a ruler would be. But I'm saying, what if they not removed, what if they made a point to paint him without the horns post-mortem because he broke free of their control, and that's why he was so beloved. I think that's pretty much what it was. I think he was allowing the Elbaf to be subjugated because of the horns, and then once he broke them off, they kind of rebelled a bit, and he lost his life because of it. But I think that's why he was so beloved by Elbaf, because before I think they were just totally subservient to the world government or to bad rulers through the fact that they were tools of the government, right?
Yeah, I do get the impression, like, especially with how Loki. So, like, Loki has that conversation with Ja Rule while they're walking to the throne room, saying that he's got no interest in a man who's interested to sell his soul to the world government, which also kind of agrees with my theory that Harold might have been trying to become a celestial dragon, because, like, that's selling out basically to the world government. But yeah, so Loki is upset that this is the same government that killed Rox, who Loki tried to join. He wanted to join their crew when he was younger. And he just doesn't like the direction that the world government is taking the world as a whole. I do think that the world government would gain a subservient giant kingdom to them, so that follows their plan of having giants on their side for the final battle. So this kind of all aligns with the giants kind of getting elevated to celestial dragon status.
I agree. It would make the giants a kingdom of the world government, which is completely at odds with the world government and all of that. So the only thing I also wanted to note in the death scene, at least for Harold, is that we see Jarul get his famous sword through the head. Now, when we saw Harold get got, they were using pole arms to turn him into Swiss cheese. But Jarul got a sword through the head. So, was it ever stated that Loki did this, or do we know who did it? It had to have been a giant, right? Because it literally is a giant sword.
Yeah, though we don't see exactly who does it. We just see an image of blood splatter, and then the next image of Ja Rule having a sword in his head. And yeah, we don't see any swords up until this point. We see that Loki has his hammer, Ragnir, but it has to be a giant that's in the throne room. So, like, the only explanation that I currently have is Ja Rule is going in the throne room trying to break it apart and rescue King Harald, and in the process getting stabbed in the head, which probably affected his memory, so he wouldn't be able to defend Loki when they tried him for the murder of his father. So yeah, like, I think it's just kind of a tragic thing that happened, because it's pretty evident that Loki didn't do what he's accused of, and he just was scapegoated by someone, possibly the world government, into being kind of like the devil of Elbaf.
So I do find it very interesting that horns seem to be playing such an interesting part in One Piece. I do think that they directly led to mind control of Harold in some way, shape, or form. So it's going to be interesting to see the flashback, but there's so much speculation after just two panels. Moving forward, there is only one other thing I wanted to mention about Harold, kind of. So, Harold, the way it's spelled, at least in One Piece, is the Old Norse spelling, like Harald. However, there is also an English word for herald, and a herald is a person or thing that is viewed as a sign that something is about to happen. So, if Loki is to bring about Ragnarok then the events that happened with Harold would be the sign that this end of days is about to happen, right? So if we think Harold and Loki are going to signify that the war is about to start, I think if we look a little bit deeper into this series, we will notice that the past couple of arcs have actually been setting this up. And what I mean by that is when we were on Zoe, we were encountered with Pedro and the Nox pirates. Nox meaning night, and they were wandering around committing pirating acts, awaiting the dawn. That was literally their motto. We're here awaiting the dawn. So then we get to Wano, and we meet the Kozukis, and we meet Toki, and we meet all these samurai clans that are all affiliated with the moon. The crescent moon, the moon in the sky, Odin and Toki, they were both burned under a moon. Toki herself had moons on her robes. The song that Odin's daughter, Hiyori, I believe it was, wrote for him was Moon Princess. So we see, the moon is in the sky. And finally we get to Elbaf and we are witnessing the dawn. We're witnessing the sun coming to Elbaf and kind of shining over the horizon as the sun does, similar to the straw hat. So I think Oda is really setting up the end of days kind of like the sun rising in the sky. And I think it's just really poetic. And I think it is a very interesting theory that really has a lot of connections to what we see in the story currently and what we've seen in the past and hopefully what we'll see in the future.
Yeah. Also, I want to bring up that he could be the herald of Ragnarok. Bringing it all together? Yeah, exactly. Well, I'm just bringing it back to our Ragnarok concept from earlier.
Definitely. So Harold dying is going to, bring about the events that lead to the end of days. I think the Giants are definitely going to be allied with the Straw Hats in some way, and this is going to propel them into the final war, because I think once the world government loses control of the Giants, we've seen that the Gorosei have already mobilized, right? So we've already seen the Gorosei mobilize and start fighting. We've now seen the God Knights mobilize. If the God Knights get their butts kicked here, then it's going to be absolute all-out war. Because what's the alternative? Is letting the ancient kingdom rise again and everybody to know the true history of the Void Century.
All right, so let's move on to the next topic, which this is just, I'm just throwing this out there, which is maybe the mysterious Mosa that Loki was talking to is Ja Rule. So when we see the Denden Mushi, it's very hairy and it's got a big beard. Ja Rule has a big beard. Maybe Ja Rule has a special connection with Loki from, we already see this from the flashback. They met up together, they walked into the throne room together, and they had like a relationship. So they had like a friendship. So maybe Ja Rule decided that he wanted to maintain his friendship because, like, even though Loki was exiled, he still felt a kinship to him. He felt bad for him. He might not have believed that Loki committed these atrocities, even if he couldn't remember it for himself. So, and then also him saying that he needs to go now. It could have been him knowing that Emu just set out a hit on him with Dorian Bragi. So he's just kind of like, hey, my time is up. I think I'm going to pass away now because I'm going to get killed by Lumu's forces. So this is goodbye. So that's kind of just throwing out this theory, mostly because they both have, like, Ja Rule has giant beard and that Denden Mushi looked very hairy. So just a potential Mosa candidate.
Very interesting. I just wanted to note, I vaguely recall when Loki was talking to Mosa and they were having their original discussions. When Mosa was telling Loki about his troubled past, Loki responded with something along the lines of, oh, I would have burned them all down, or something to that regard. I think that leads more into the possibility that Loki could be related to fire or a fire giant and so.
Oh, true. Yeah.
But to your point, I do think it would be interesting to be if it was Ja Rule himself. However, I think the beard of the Denden Mushi actually looks a little bit different than Ja Rule's beard, but I don't know. Maybe the Denden Mushis do not necessarily completely mirror the appearance of their user. But I do think it would be interesting if Ja Rule was Mosa and talking to Loki all this time. However, I think after Ja Rule got a sword through the head, I think his personality will.
Yeah, and that's to be expected because it's hard to think with a sword in your head.
Lessons for life. So in this battle that we see right now, do you think that Ja Rule is going to get the sword removed from his head to allow him to be controlled by the world government? And then Loki might have to take him out?
No, I think if that sword gets removed from his head, he'll die. Like, I think that is just part of him now. I think that Ja Rule probably will die because he was already old during the 14 years ago flashback scene. So he's even older now. And also he's got like a permanent thing in his brain. So I think it might be his time to go. Like we might see him get slain this arc.
I'm not too married to the idea of Ja Rule. I view him as a walking, talking Excalibur at this point, sword in the stone. But I do think it's going to be interesting. Do you think that Loki and Hajrudin are gonna join forces to beat up Dorian Brody, tag team, if you will?
Yeah, I think that maybe even Loki himself might be able to solo them. I really think that Loki is going to be extremely powerful. Like there's no doubt about it. But yeah, we'll see how he compares to some giants that were already strong in their own right, Dorian Brody, but getting a power boost from Emu. So we'll see how they actually compare. We'll see if they're going to be Loki level of strength or not, because Loki is kind of like the strongest of the strong when it comes to giants. So we'll see if these turn giants are on that same level.
If Loki is a fire giant, I don't think he would be able to use his fruit near the tree at all, though. So
yeah, that's true. Yeah. Or if he does, it's intentional because it's Ragnarok. It's the destruction of Elbaf, and he's the harbinger of it. So it could go that way too, where let's say it is Surtur and he turns into a giant fire being monster. He burns everything to the ground, and the giants will have to find somewhere else to live.
that's interesting. That's very Fishman Island.
But it's going to be okay because once, they solve the One Piece puzzle and save the world, the sea levels will go back down and there's going to be more land mass for the giants to live on. So it'll be fine.
It's gonna go back down, and then everybody's gonna live in perfect harmony instead of on the top of mountains that are islands.
Exactly.
So I can't wait. I do really like the setup of the sun rising into the sky, and if you think about it too, like the flames of the sun are going to clean the world up. Fire giant would be kind of cool. Just saying.
It would be.
All right, awesome. So I think that this was a great chapter. Again, this was chapter 1152 of One Piece. This is the Void Century podcast. Please check us out wherever you get your podcasts. We also have a YouTube at the Void Century Podcast and a Gmail at the Void Century Podcast at gmail.com. Please feel free to reach out to us. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much.
Bye, guys.